The look on his face when he dragged his suitcase into the empty house was the moment I had been waiting for. His mistress stood behind him, smiling like she had won the war. But as they opened door after door and found nothing but stripped walls and hollow silence, I knew the power had shifted forever. I had sold the house right from under him, while he was away cheating in our own bed. And that, my friend, was only the beginning. But before I tell you how I turned betrayal into the sweetest revenge, you need to understand exactly what he did to me and why I had no choice but to destroy the life he thought he owned. If you've ever been wronged, if you've ever looked at someone who betrayed you and thought one day you'll pay for this, then this story will live in your bones. Because what I did next didn't just end a marriage, it rewrote the balance of power. Hit that like button if you believe in justice, served cold, and subscribe if you're ready for more stories that prove karma alone isn't enough. Sometimes you have to take justice into your own hands. The house always seemed too quiet when he wasn't around, but lately the silence felt heavier, like the air itself was holding its breath. At first, I told myself he was working late, grinding for promotions, carrying the weight of bills and responsibilities on his shoulders. That's what I wanted to believe, because the alternative was too ugly to name. But denial is a weak shield. Every time I inhaled, I caught faint traces of perfume that didn't belong to me, sweet and sharp, clinging to his shirts. Every time he turned his phone face down on the counter, I felt the invisible wall growing taller between us. We had once been the couple people envied. Friends told us we had a spark, the kind of connection they wanted for themselves. I believed them too. Our wedding pictures still hung on the hallway wall. 2 kids smiling like they had conquered the world, promising forever. But forever has cracks. They don't appear as explosions. They whisper, they chip, they fracture. I noticed him laughing less at my jokes, his hand pulling away from mine too quickly when we walked down the street. He was there, but not with me. And absence can hurt more than anger. There is a special kind of madness in trying to hold on to someone who has already let go. I stood in front of the mirror at night, searching my reflection for answers. Was I not enough? Was I too much? I began changing little things. Different lipstick, new dresses, cooking meals I thought he'd like better. Each effort was a pebble thrown into a black hole, swallowed without sound. He didn't even notice. His eyes were somewhere else, his laughter reserved for someone I hadn't met yet. The house that was supposed to be our safe place turned into a stranger's skin. The living room, where we once cuddled through movies, became the space where he claimed he was too tired to sit with me. The bedroom we decorated together became a battlefield of excuses. Late nights at work, sudden trips, messages he answered in the bathroom. I told myself I was imagining it, but deep down I knew. When love shifts, you can feel it in your bones, even if you don't want to admit it. Then came the missing money, small at first. A transfer here, a cash withdrawal there. He brushed it off with a careless smile. Just bills, don't worry. But the numbers didn't add up. And numbers don't lie, even when people do. One evening, while he was showering, I checked his wallet. Inside was a receipt from a restaurant we had never gone to together. A dinner for 2, complete with wine and dessert. My chest tightened, as if the paper itself was crushing me. That's when the denial finally started to die. Still, I wasn't ready to confront him. Part of me clung to the hope that I was wrong, that there was an explanation waiting to save me from this spiral. But explanations never came. Instead, his absences grew longer, his temper sharper. He criticized me for little things. Folding laundry wrong, forgetting to replace the coffee. It was as if he was rewriting me in his mind, turning me into the villain of his story so he could justify betraying me in his. The breaking moment of that chapter came late one night. I was cleaning the kitchen when I noticed 2 wine glasses in the sink. I hadn't been drinking. My hand froze on the sponge, and in that stillness I understood. He hadn't even bothered to hide it anymore. He had brought her here, into my home, into the space where my laughter once lived, where I laid my head in trust. He had crossed the line from secret betrayal to shameless invasion. I didn't confront him right away. Instead, I sat alone in the dark, the glow of the refrigerator light washing over me, as the questions circled like vultures. Who was she? What did she have that I didn't? How long had I been living with this ghost in my house? The answers didn't matter, not really. What mattered was the shift inside me. Something hardened, something sharpened. A part of me that used to beg for scraps of love now began to hunger for something else. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, justice. That night, I cried until there were no tears left. The silence afterward was different. Not the heavy, suffocating silence of loneliness, but a new silence, a calm before a storm. I went to bed beside him, pretending to sleep as he scrolled on his phone, his lips curling into secret smiles. My body lay still, but inside me, something had awakened. This was no longer about saving us. It was about saving myself. The woman I had been, the one who doubted, who begged, who clung, was beginning to dissolve. In her place, something stronger was forming. I didn't know it then. But those cracks in the walls weren't the end of my story. They were the beginning of a new one. And sooner than he could imagine, those cracks would be the very fault lines that brought his world crashing down. The heart doesn't break in one loud shatter. It crumbles in fragments, slow enough to keep you doubting, but sharp enough to leave you bleeding. Mine reached its final fracture on an ordinary Tuesday night, the kind of night when you don't expect your world to collapse. I remember it too clearly. The smell of rain on the pavement, the hum of the city outside, and the uneasy silence in my chest as I turned the key in the lock earlier than usual. I had left work early that evening, driven by nothing more than instinct. Something inside me whispered that if I didn't come home then, I would miss the truth forever. I wish I could tell you I was wrong. But fate has a way of delivering clarity when you least want it. The door swung open, and there they were, standing in my kitchen, as if it belonged to them. He was leaning against the counter, laughing in a way I hadn't heard in years. That laughter used to belong to me, but now it wrapped around her like a gift. She stood close to him, stirring a pot on the stove, wearing one of his shirts that I recognized instantly, a shirt I had ironed, a shirt I had folded into his drawer with care. On her, it looked like mockery. For a moment, I froze. My mind refused to catch up with my eyes. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to collapse on the floor. Instead, I just stood there, silent and invisible, watching my marriage collapse like a building set on fire. Neither of them noticed me right away. That, in itself, was the final insult. They were too absorbed in each other, too comfortable in the home I had built with him, to even sense my presence. When he finally saw me, his smile faltered, but only for a moment. Then he shrugged it off, pretending nothing was wrong, as if I was the intruder in my own home. She glanced at me with a smirk so small I almost thought I imagined it. But I didn't. That smirk was real. It was the face of someone who believed she had already won. Humiliation burned hotter than grief. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. Instead, I walked into the living room and sat down, my hands trembling, but my face composed. They followed me, pretending to explain, to justify, but every word was just static. I wasn't listening anymore. I was studying him, studying her, studying the way betrayal looked when it thought it had the upper hand. And in that stillness, a dangerous clarity rose inside me. There are moments in life when your old self dies. That night, mine did. The woman who excused his late nights, who doubted her worth, who cried in silence, she was gone. In her place stood someone colder, sharper, a woman who had no intention of forgiving. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I knew one thing with perfect clarity. They would pay. I excused myself to the bedroom, my voice steady, almost casual. I shut the door, and on the other side, I finally let the tears fall, not out of weakness, but out of release. Each tear felt like a farewell to the version of me that had been too soft, too trusting. When the tears stopped, my reflection in the mirror startled me. My eyes were red, but behind them burned something unrecognizable, something fierce. I slept little that night, but I wasn't tired. I lay awake, listening to the muffled laughter from the other side of the wall. My hand clenched into a fist beneath the covers. Every laugh was fuel. Every whisper was gasoline. I didn't storm out, didn't demand explanations. That's what they expected me to do. Instead, I waited, because revenge isn't born in the noise of rage. It grows in silence, nurtured by patience. By morning, he acted as if nothing had happened. He kissed my forehead with lips that had just touched hers. The audacity nearly made me flinch, but I stayed still. I let him think he had me under control. I let him think I was broken. What he didn't know was that I was already building something in my mind, something stronger than heartbreak, something that would leave scars deeper than any argument ever could. He walked out the door that morning, whistling, his keys jingling like a soundtrack to his arrogance. I stood at the window and watched him leave, my arms folded tight. In that moment, I made a silent vow. He thought he had stripped me of everything, but he had just given me the one thing he could never take back: purpose. That day was the turning point. The betrayal was no longer a wound. It was a weapon. And soon, he would learn what it felt like to stand in a house that no longer belonged to him. Rage gives you fire, but revenge demands discipline. I knew if I acted on impulse, I'd end up screaming in his face, maybe throwing a few plates, and he would walk away smug, blaming me for losing control. That kind of scene might have given me temporary satisfaction, but it wouldn't touch the foundation of his arrogance. No, what I wanted was deeper. I didn't just want him to feel pain. I wanted him to feel powerless. And for that, I needed patience. And I needed the law on my side. The first step was secrecy. Outwardly, I played the role of the tired but loyal wife. I smiled when I had to, cooked meals he barely touched, asked about his day like I still cared. Every nod, every hollow laugh was camouflage, hiding the storm brewing behind my calm. Inside, though, I was moving with quiet precision. While he stayed out late with her, I stayed up late at the dining table, papers spread across the wood like puzzle pieces. Bank statements, credit card receipts, mortgage deeds. I hunted through them all with a focus that surprised even me. Money leaves trails, and he had been sloppy. I traced every indulgence, every hidden dinner, every unaccounted purchase. He thought he was clever, slipping cash out in small amounts, using cards under work expenses. But the numbers betrayed him. Numbers don't lie, and neither did the contracts he signed without reading. Our home, for example. He liked to boast that it was his house, that he paid for everything. But the ink told a different story. My name was there too, carved into the deed, giving me rights he had conveniently forgotten. Rights I was about to use like a blade. I consulted a lawyer quietly, under the guise of visiting a friend, sitting across from her in a quiet office. I laid out the story piece by piece. She didn't flinch at the betrayal. She had heard worse. But when I told her what I wanted, to sell the house while he was distracted, her eyes widened, then narrowed, calculating. "It's possible," she said slowly. "If you're ready for the fallout, My voice didn't waver when I answered. I'm past ready. The legal groundwork took time. Paperwork isn't as satisfying as smashing a window or screaming into his face. But in its own way, it's sharper, more final. Every signature I made was another thread in the net I was weaving. I signed forms to transfer authority, to list the house, to arrange a sale. Each form was a weapon disguised as ink. And all the while, I kept smiling at him over dinner, listening to his empty lies about working late, while knowing I was dismantling his empire brick by brick. But revenge isn't just paperwork, it's theater. I needed him blind to what was happening, so I played my part with perfection. When he hinted at taking his mistress on vacation, I encouraged it, even helped him pick out shirts to pack. He thought my compliance was weakness. He thought I was finally defeated, ready to accept scraps of affection, while he flaunted his betrayal. Little did he know, I was giving him rope. The day he left, suitcase in hand and smugness written all over his face. I kissed his cheek as if nothing was wrong. Have fun, I said softly, my voice smooth as glass. He smiled, believing I had finally surrendered. But behind him, as the door clicked shut, I was already dialing numbers, setting the final wheels in motion. Within hours, open house signs sprouted on our lawn. Strangers walked through the rooms that once echoed with our promises. Each step they took across the hardwood floors was a silent goodbye to the life he thought he owned. There's a thrill in building revenge quietly. It's like mixing poison into wine. Slow, careful, invisible. The victim drinks with a smile, unaware that every sip brings them closer to collapse. That was what I felt each night as I watched the paperwork move. As I signed final agreements, as I tucked copies of contracts into a folder he would never find. I was serving him poison in the form of legality, and he was gulping it down without suspicion. I began to sleep better. Not because I forgave him, but because the balance was shifting. For the first time in months, I wasn't powerless. Every form I filed was a victory, every document a dagger. And as I lay in bed at night, hearing his late-night phone calls muffled through the bathroom door, I no longer felt the sting of betrayal. I felt anticipation. The house was nearly ready to be stripped from under him. Soon, the walls he thought belonged to him would stand empty. Soon, the life he paraded with her would crumble. He believed he was untouchable, a king ruling his castle. But kings forget. The castle only stands as long as the queen allows it. And I had already decided, when he returned, his castle would be nothing but dust. The sale moved like a secret current beneath ordinary days, invisible until it became a flood. Signs went up on the lawn with polite fonts and eager phone numbers. A smiling agent walked through rooms I once dusted, pointing out sunlight and square footage to strangers who pretended they were looking for a home and not a story. I watched it happen with a strange calm, as if I could see the future through the thin paper of contracts and knew exactly how the scene would unfold. The thrill of it was quiet and surgical, not loud and messy. Revenge is often more effective when it is almost bureaucratic, done in ink and signatures, rather than in shouts and broken glass. On the morning he left, I had made coffee and poured it into a thermos, as if for an ordinary commute. I kissed his cheek, touched the hollow of his neck, where his pulse thudded like a drum of arrogance, and told him, "Have a good trip." He left whistling, the suitcase clicking down the stairs like a mocking metronome. I closed the door behind him and understood, with a clarity that steadied rather than shook me, that the next time it opened for him, it would not be for him to walk back into comfort. It would be to walk into absence. The open house was staged like theater. I walked through each room ahead of time, rearranging a picture frame, smoothing a cushion, placing a vase so a visitor's eyes would travel a certain way. It felt weirdly intimate, touching the spaces where our memories lived and preparing them to be appraised by strangers. There was a cruelty in that intimacy, a necessary distancing. I had to lay my bones bare so the world could judge them, and then take them away so he would see his life unmade with other people's footsteps echoing through it. When the agents reported back, offers low, offers cautious, I didn't flinch. Each counteroffer I accepted felt like closing the lid on a coffin. Paperwork crossed my desk. Disclosures, escrow, signatures that I appended with a steady hand. In those lines of typed text, I felt the shape of my revenge take form. It was not dramatic in a cinematic way. There were no fireworks, no grand confrontations. The most devastating things are often administrative. A deed transferred, a bank wire confirmed, a key turned over to a new name. Those small moments add up to annihilation. I remember the day the sale finalized like a second birthday. Quiet, precise, and impossible to celebrate. The closing agent slid the pen across the table. I signed with the same calm I had shown him that morning. The ink dried under the fluorescent office lights, and for a brief, ridiculous second, I felt like applauding my own competence. I paid the fees, I folded the documents into a neat stack, and I walked out holding a folder that felt heavier than any suitcase he had ever carried. The house was no longer ours. It was not even his anymore. Revenge, when planned, leaves odd detritus, stranger's mail, the faint scent of someone else's perfume on a cushion, the knowledge that someone else will hang their own photos on those same walls. I watched as the new owners moved in, laughing in tones that used to mean something different in my ear. Their footsteps were foreign and final. I had imagined the moment he would return 1,000 times. His car pulling up, his suitcase thudding, the click of the key. In my most private imaginings, he would stand in the doorway and feel the ground underneath him disappear. I didn't need the fantasy to be cinematic. I needed it to be absolute. The afternoon he returned, the house felt too small for both of us. He swung the door open, suitcase in hand, and breath still heavy from travel, expecting the familiar, the clatter of my keys, the smell of dinner, the lazy chaos of home. Instead, he found strangers, shoes by the door, and a silence that hummed with other people's lives. He called my name once, then again, like a man trying to recall a password he used to know. There was an awkwardness to his voice that made the edges of my satisfaction sharper. When he finally saw the agent standing in the entryway, neat blazer, polite smile, clipboard in hand, his face contorted through disbelief to anger, with a speed that looked ugly on him. "What is this?" he demanded, voice high, urgent, as if volume could rewind ink. I watched him shuffle through the stale script of entitlement, the words he always used when the world didn't bend to his will. The agent explained gently that the property had been sold, that keys had been transferred, and that all legal channels had been observed. The agent's calm was a mirror I wished he had learned to look into sooner. I could see the realization crawl across his face, piece by piece, the way a shadow spreads. At first, he accused me, predictable and loud. He claimed deceit, manipulation, some grand conspiracy cooked up by me and the state of the legal system. He pressed for paperwork, for explanations, for mercy, as if those things were commodities he could bargain for. But the documents lay in a folder, already claimed by law and signature. Mercy did not belong to him anymore. He tried threats next, the baring of teeth that had always been his last resort. He threatened lawsuits, reputation, the exposure of mistakes I had worked hard to hide. He threatened in the language of men who believe fear is currency. He pleaded too, groveling in ways that would have once softened me. He promised to stop, to fix, to make everything right if I only reversed the sale. There was a ridiculousness in his pleas that made me almost laugh. The man who had abandoned honesty now begged for it. I let him speak, and with each sentence, his power dissolved a little further. I won't pretend the moment brought absolute vindication. The ecstasy I had imagined was complicated by other emotions. A hollow where memory used to be. A strange grief for the life dismantled. Even a whisper of doubt about the cost of what I had taken. The house was gone, and with it a chapter of my life. But the scale had tipped. He could no longer step into a space that ensured his dominance. He had to reckon with absence. Watching him stand in the doorway, furious and unmoored, I felt something like relief. Sharp, clean and irrevocable. As he left that day, his steps sounded lighter than before, as if some weight had been removed. Only this time the weight was his pride, and the removal was not a gift. I closed the door and leaned my forehead against the cool wood, feeling the thud of my own heart in a quiet room, now occupied by strangers. The plan had worked. The trap had closed. The question that floated then, and still floats now, was not whether he had lost what he loved, but whether I had lost myself, somewhere in the act of taking it back. He didn't leave quietly. Men like him never do. For days after the sale, he circled me like a wounded predator, torn between fury and desperation. First came the rage. Slammed doors. Phone calls that echoed through the walls. Threats spat out between clenched teeth. He swore he would undo it, that no judge, no law, no woman could take from him what he believed was his by right. His arrogance hadn't caught up to the reality yet, but reality doesn't wait for arrogance. The papers were final. The house was gone. His empire had collapsed in silence, and all his noise couldn't bring it back. When threats failed, he turned to begging. He sat across from me at the kitchen table of a rented apartment, so much smaller than the home he once boasted about, and his hands trembled as he tried to lace his fingers through mine. He promised change. He promised loyalty. He promised that she meant nothing, that it had all been a mistake. His voice cracked in ways I had never heard before, the sound of a man trying to climb out of a pit he dug himself. I listened, not with compassion, but with detachment, because in every syllable of regret, I heard the echo of laughter he once shared with her in my kitchen, and regret after betrayal tastes bitter. It cannot be sweetened, no matter how much you plead. Still, watching him unravel was not the triumph I had imagined. I thought his collapse would heal me, that justice served would be a balm on old wounds. Instead, it left a hollow ache. Revenge had stripped him bare, but it hadn't restored what he had stolen from me. Trust doesn't return when you take away someone's comfort. Love doesn't resurrect itself just because the betrayer has fallen. What I had gained was power. What I had lost was innocence. Friends told me I had won. They raised glasses, congratulated my courage, whispered their admiration at the precision of my revenge, and part of me believed them. I had taken back control, proven that I wasn't weak, shown him that betrayal carried consequences. But late at night, when the noise of the world quieted, I sometimes wondered what part of me had been burned away in the process. Revenge is not a clean fire. It leaves ash in your lungs. He tried once more to claw his way back. Papers were filed, motions to contest, accusations hurled in courtrooms. But the law sided with ink, not arrogance. Every attempt collapsed, every argument dismissed. He grew smaller in my eyes, not just because he lost, but because I realized he had always been small. The power he wielded over me was never real. It was borrowed, built on the illusion that I needed him more than he needed me. The moment I stopped believing that, the balance shifted forever. The mistress, his supposed savior, faded too. I heard whispers that their romance soured when the money dried up, when the house she had strutted through with triumph belonged to strangers. She vanished from his life like smoke, leaving him alone with the wreckage. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Life had a way of finishing what I had started. As for me, I stood in the ruins of what once was and began building something new, not with him, not with memories of what we had, but with the raw knowledge of who I had become. Stronger, colder perhaps, but undeniably freer. The house was gone, but I no longer cared. A house is just walls and wood. What mattered was the truth I carried, that I could not be broken by his betrayal, that I had the power to burn everything down if I chose, and to walk away from the ashes without flinching. And yet, the question lingered, haunting me in quiet moments. Did I win? Or did I simply exchange one kind of prison for another? The prison of bitterness, the chains of vengeance. Some nights, as I lay awake in a bed that was finally mine alone, I would whisper the answer back and forth inside my head. But maybe that's the real truth of revenge. It doesn't hand you peace. It hands you a mirror, and you have to decide whether you like what you see staring back. So if you ask me whether I regret selling the house, whether I regret stripping him of the foundation he thought untouchable, my answer is simple. No. He had taken too much from me, and this was the only way to make him feel what I felt. But if you ask me whether revenge healed me, whether it closed the wound, my silence will tell you more than words ever could. Because some wounds don't close. They just harden. In the end, the house was gone. The marriage was gone. And the life I once believed in was gone. What remained was me, sharper and scarred, carrying the lesson that justice doesn't always bring joy, but it does bring balance. And sometimes that's enough.